Wah! So fast. Olga helplessly watched the last of her zombies tumble down the slope. It flopped and bounced like a rag doll before vanishing beyond her goggles' dark vision range. The beastmen who beat them up didn't even need to destroy her soldiers directly, they just had to send them careening back down the valley and the fall would break them apart. She could imagine one of the elder liches at home informing her that she had lost all of her points while her opponent had retained all of theirs. She and Raoul had been circling high above the beastman forces for the last hour. It seemed that their opponents were unaware of their presence, though it wasn't surprising given all the measures taken to conceal them, allowing Olga and Raoul the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the battlefield unharassed. Never mind seeing so many demi-humans in one place before, she had never even seen so many humans before. The massive bestial form seemed to squirm and ripple with a life of its own, and she could feel a sense of primal fear scratching at the edge of her awareness with so many fearsome predators below. Despite all that, she felt surprisingly calm. Maybe because they didn't look like they could reach her. Lady Zaradnik was nearby, too. Did they even hurt one of them? It does not appear to be the case, the elder lich riding behind her said. Such expectations for our forces are unreasonable in this situation. MMH. She frowned down at the beastmen celebrating their victory over Olga's soldiers. Though the elder lich said it wasn't a big deal, the beastmen were treating it like one. They raised their claws and roared in jubilation as if they had defeated an entire army rather than a handful of one-point zombies. The main battle hadn't been joined yet, but small groups of beastmen had crept down from their positions for some reason. Lady Zaradnik saw it as an opportunity to conduct a few skirmishes and learn more about their opponents. Olga and Raoul had been assigned to two of the approaches and told to poke around a bit. Her first poke had been slapped down so quickly that she wondered what the point was. How are we supposed to do anything if they win so easily? Olga said, just tire them out by burying them with undead? That appears to be the most viable tactic, the elder lich said. Our current orders, however, are to probe their lines and collect useful data. About half of our forces are across the river. Keep testing the beastmen until further orders. Olga scratched her flight cap at Lady Zaradnik's instructions. What were they supposed to figure out? It felt like the result would be the same no matter what they did. Or maybe there was something else to it. When she was teaching them stuff, Lady Zaradnik rarely talked about combat strength, formations or special orders. Most of her instruction revolved around understanding their opponents, setting precedents, managing expectations and manipulating morale and sentiment. As a commander, one of Olga's roles was to come up with effective strategies as they learned how to wage war on a wide scale. The tactical side of things was the job of the elder lich sergeants and any captains under her command. Baroness Zaradnik said that, eventually, they might end up commanding her since she was more like a captain, but that sounded way too crazy. It was the way the Royal Army worked, though. Unlike the hierarchies of army officers in the books she read, one's role was independent of one's rank in the Royal Army of the Sorceress Kingdom. Commanders like Wiluvian and Leluvian issued orders to captains like Lady Zaradnik, but Lady Zaradnik outranked them in terms of organizational authority. Lady Zaradnik was the chief of staff of the forces in the Draconic Kingdom, but the work of commanders and generals was done by her general staff and the general staff of the other army groups participating in the analysis and planning for the theater. Commanders issued orders to captains because that's what commanders did, not because they were above them. Captains were frontline field commanders, but what they contributed to grand strategy was still weighed seriously. Rank was issued according to one's competence and ability, not one's role, thus every member of the Royal Army was expected to act optimally according to their respective positions. Lady Zaradnik considered it the proper way to organize a country's armed forces, stating that the structure of other militaries that conflated vocation with authority was fundamentally flawed. In those militaries, captains were promoted to generals and assumed a different role, which crippled their development. Those who became commanders tended to spend years or even decades acting as sergeants and captains first, which was even worse. In the Sorceress Kingdom, a captain always acted as a captain and a commander always acted as a commander, no matter their rank. In many ways, it was much like how Warden's Veil worked. Social status was dependent on vocational expertise rather than the place that one's vocation had in society. A noble was an administrator and they were granted rights and authority for the purposes of their role. Being a noble did not make one inherently better. If a noble popped up and acted like they were better than everyone else just because they were a noble, they'd be laughed right out of the territory. If it was reported to her, Lady Zaradnik would probably tie the offender to a couple of logs and send them floating back down the river. Whether Countess Corlin would stop the logs before they entered the Katza Plains was questionable. Olga eyed the beastmen below, who were edging their way down the slope again. "Have you done anything like this before?" Olga asked the Elder Lich. "No," the Elder Lich replied. "The behavior of these beastmen does not reflect the training received in the Southeast Army Group." "Same here," Olga frowned. "Everything moves according to our orders when we have practice battles. These beastmen just do whatever they want." "Indeed. Their formations and general discipline are irregular. They were more like gangs of thugs than an army. A gang of super-strong thugs." She could see how the Draconic Kingdom could lose to them. Human soldiers and militia might have greater discipline and skill, but the beastmen were so strong and numerous that they could just brute force their way to victory. After thinking for a bit, she sent a dozen skeletons after the group closest to the bottom. Skeletons seemed to do a lot better than zombies so far. The beastman-shaped skeletons came clambering up the slope a few seconds later. Lots of roars and shouting drifted up from below. 4 other groups of beastmen edged closer, but didn't join the fight. In the end, her skeletons were all destroyed and the beastmen were celebrating another victory. "The enemy has broken ranks significantly on the other side of the ravine," the Elder Lich said. Olga looked out to the far side of the approach, which was a wide gulch carved by a creek flowing down from the plains above. Never mind breaking ranks, the entire line there had shifted forward. A dozen groups were far ahead of the rest, as if trying to creep over to where beastman tribes were celebrating their win. It was almost like watching a bunch of kids seeing some other kids having fun and being drawn closer. "Do you think they'll come all the way across?" "There is no precedent for or against," the Elder Lich said. "This one recommends that you explore your quarry. Then, send 2 groups of zombies up the same way as before, but make sure the groups are apart from one another." "Not skeletons? We should save them up. Those beastmen use their claws and teeth when they go crazy. When we attack them for real, having lots of skeletons will be better." Skeletal undead were good against slashing and piercing attacks, which not only meant blades, but natural weapons that acted like blades as well. Zombies, on the other hand, were easily shredded apart. The 2 groups of zombies appeared out of the vegetation and shuffled up the gulch. Several bunches of beastmen came down to meet them. Once again, the first ones that made contact fought while the others hung back. In the other parts of the gulch, parts of the beastmen lines drifted closer. "Send 2 more groups of zombies after those guys that are fighting right now," Olga said. "Maybe they'll come all the way down." She expected them to come after the new groups of zombies once they finished fighting, but the groups that weren't fighting ran ahead instead. They barreled down the slope and smashed into the undead in a frenzy of fur, teeth and claws. 3 more groups of zombies, Olga said hurriedly. "Do we have skeleton mages in the bushes nearby?" "Our skeleton mages have been relegated to the rear of the formation," the Elder Lich said. "We do, however, have skeleton archers in range." "Oh. Get them ready to attack once the zombies are gone." Olga leaned forward eagerly as she watched the skirmish play out. Before the beastmen could get in range of her hidden archers, however, a group of 4 different-looking beastmen came running down. Shouts rose from below, going back and forth between the different groups and the newly arrived one. Eventually, they headed back to the enemy lines above. She pouted. It was a good try. She jumped at the new voice and found Lady Zaradnik flying beside them. The Baroness smiled at her reaction. Olga turned away to hide her embarrassment. "I didn't kill any of them, my lady," she said. "You lost 2 Copper League armies worth of undead, too," Lady Zaradnik noted. I did?" "Indeed," the Elder Lich said, "out of a total of 96 points, I get it." Olga squawked, flapping her arms. "I'm sorry, my lady. I couldn't get anything done." She glared down at the beastmen, especially the group that had stopped them from falling into her trap. All those losses were for nothing. "On the contrary," Lady Zaradnik said, "you've accomplished quite a bit. Not only did you develop enough of an understanding to exploit their poor discipline, but you drew out a group of their warriors. The ones that came down and yelled at them?" "That's right," the Baroness nodded. We weren't able to identify any up to the point where you brought them out from the enemy lines. How do you know they're warriors, my lady? Olga asked. The weakest of them is about twice as strong as the average beastman down there, Lady Zaradnik answered. I have a bit of ranger in me and scouts can discern the strength of things at a glance. There are other ways to figure it out though. How individuals carry themselves and how others react to a subject don't require them to directly demonstrate their strength. Since the other beastmen deferred to that group of 4, you can infer that they hold some form of authority or expertise that commands respect. If that's true, shouldn't we have done something while they were near our lines? Beastmen were already strong, so she couldn't imagine how good beastman warriors would be against their weak little undead. All of their strong stuff was held in reserve, so they were going to lose a lot. They're not concealing themselves, Lady Zaradnik said, so we're seeing where they return to. Beastmen might not be us, but they still have social structures and patterns of behavior that can be recognized. The faster we learn, the more effectively we can devise our strategies and tactics. Commanders are in the best position to observe the broad behavior of their enemies in battle. Those fighting on the front lines are often preoccupied with what is going on in their immediate vicinity. Is that why you told us to do this, my lady? Olga asked. That's right, the Baroness answered. Over the winter, you've become familiar with basic concepts in warfare. Now, you'll be learning how to read a different sort of opponent and learn how to understand and influence the flow of battle. I didn't even need to say much, both you and Raoul started piecing things together on your own. Raoul did this too? Not in the same manner as you have, Lady Zaradnik said. His style of command is quite distinct from yours. Olga was all too aware of this, having fought hundreds of battles against him. He's reckless, she said. Raoul is aggressive, the Baroness told her. Because of that, it can be difficult to discern whether he's being reckless or not. The reports of your battles over the winter show that there is often a degree of calculation to his aggression, which has more often than not led to desirable results. I bet he wiped out 10 Copper League armies worth of soldiers, Olga frowned. He did, Lady Zaradnik smirked. Since you've been his partner for months, I suppose it isn't surprising that you could guess. Isn't losing a quarter of the undead that he had bad? It depends on how you look at it. One of the objectives of a skirmish is to discover everything that you can about the enemy and uncover potential problems with your own forces. We're using weak, mindless undead to do this, and the elder liches that run out of them will go back to the Katza Plains to get more. In essence, they are disposable skirmishers and Raoul is taking advantage of that. The elder liches controlling them benefit from his actions, as well. Olga and Raoul weren't the only ones learning how to wage war. Every elder lich was assigned to control a specific set of undead. When they were deployed to perform a task, they would try and figure out the best ways to accomplish that task with what they had. The eventual goal was to not only have elder liches that were highly adept at controlling specific contingents of undead, but also to build up a library of knowledge for the whole royal army to learn from. So what did he do, my lady? Olga asked. He ordered 3 elder liches to attack the beastmen with their dominated forces, Lady Zaradnik answered. It was a straightforward fight, but it brought a number of interesting things to light. Does that mean the way I did it was wrong? What you discovered was different from what Raoul discovered. Both of you succeeded in gathering useful information with these skirmishes, which was the primary objective. Rather than measuring battlefield results in terms of right and wrong, you should weigh what was gained against what was lost and whether it was worth it or not. Since our troops are what they are, it makes one part of that equation simple. The part that Lady Zaradnik referred to was sacrificing troops. If it was a human army, they would have to worry about how people felt about losing friends and family or being treated as disposable pawns. Soldiers were supposed to understand that their commanders might ask difficult things of them, but they were still people with minds of their own. Mindless undead didn't have that problem and the weak ones were easily replaceable since the Katza Plains kept spawning them. What are we going to do now? Our forces have finished crossing the river, the Baroness said. We're ordering them into their formations now. The elder liches will be carrying out the battle plan once everything is ready. Your job is to continue observing the beastmen. Are you going to join the fight, my lady? Lady Zaradnik shook her head. That would risk tearing apart the illusion that we're trying to weave. If I join the fight, the beastmen may conclude that the undead are fighting for the Draconic Kingdom. Complications may arise as a result. Like what? The beastmen still occupy the vast majority of the country, the Baroness said. They may threaten to slaughter what's left of the population. We are operating under the authority of the Draconic Kingdom, so if their government gives in to the threat, we will be obliged to stand down. In other words, their strategy was centered around a huge bluff. As long as the beastmen believed that they were fighting an undead horde from the Katza Plains, they would react accordingly. The subjugated populations of the Draconic Kingdom would remain safe because the beastmen wouldn't connect them to the undead. They would push the beastmen out in an undead way and the beastmen would think that the humans overrun by the wave of undeath had suffered a fate worse than death. In reality, they would be untouched and return to their normal lives. Whether the plan would work or not was yet to be seen, but nothing suggested that their undead army was anything but what it appeared to be. Lady Zaradnik, Psycho said, our forces are ready to advance. Let's get started, then. Make sure we don't apply too much pressure. Our first objective is to ensure that they don't eat up the remaining citizens on their way out, so we need to keep reducing their numbers here. Lady Zaradnik called Raoul over. They watched as a smattering of zombies and skeletons entered the edges of their dark vision. The advancing undead were sparse and arranged randomly, presenting little threat to their opponents. Our soldiers are gonna get destroyed like this, Raoul said. Shouldn't we pack them in tighter? We're opening with a move derived from Olga's findings, Lady Zaradnik said. The beastmen here appear to be highly susceptible to the effects of morale. Not only does this mean that poor morale may make them flee prematurely, but good morale can encourage them to stick around and fight harder. What I really want to see, however, is if we can induce something similar to the collective frenzy that we saw in Oraculon. Olga shuddered at the mention of the attack on the Draconic Kingdom's capital. Half of the people there had been butchered and she heard that they would be burning corpses for weeks. The demi-humans here were even worse than the ones that would occasionally raid villages and Riestais. But those warriors appeared when the ones I was luring down went too far, Olga said. Aren't they just going to stop them again? Since they ran down to speak to them, the Baroness replied, they don't appear to be commanders. Things won't be so easy to manage when the entire front is getting sucked into the fighting. There should be plenty of Lord-class beastmen here, but we'll only know what they're capable of after they start using skills and abilities with noticeable effects. Speaking of which, a solid feeling filled Olga. She poked her palm experimentally. What was that? An ability, Lady Zaradnik said. A battlefield aura. Commanders can project them over their subordinates, but they're relatively weak compared to command skills. This defensive aura will help make it easier for the Elder Liches to manage the flow of battle. Like many vocations, commanders had skills and abilities. They were never mentioned in the books that Olga read, so she figured that they were something like military secrets. The Lynam sisters were trying to teach Olga and Raoul how to communicate over long distances, but, so far, they hadn't figured it out yet. How does it help make it easier for the Elder Liches? Olga asked. Though I say that it's a weak effect, it adds up. When there are thousands of undead and each zombie and skeleton takes a little bit longer to destroy, all of those little bit longers add up and have the effect of slowing down the battle. This gives our sergeants more time to respond to developments and act more effectively with their troops. Most undead are already more resilient than their living counterparts and they don't tire, so augmenting their defenses helps them to wear down their opponents more efficiently. Below, the leading edge of the undead army was making contact with the beastman lines, which had drifted forward as individuals rushed into attack. As expected, the zombies and skeletons didn't last long, but there were many more on the way. Let's give them a bit of a nudge, Lady Zaradnik said. Have the skeleton archers mixed in with the vanguard loose arrows into the enemy formation. The beastmen didn't like that. Not half a minute after the order was given, groups of demi-humans charged down the slope to destroy the undead, pestering them with arrows. Nearby undead closed in on them and a new front was quickly established as more of the enemy joined the fray. Lady Zaradnik, Psycho said, we believe we have identified several beastman lords using conventional orders to command their forces. How shall we deal with them? They're pressing the attack, the Baroness said, which is what we want. Leave them be for now, but keep track of them. Continue drawing the beastman forces into the valley. When the front came halfway down from the top of the ravine, stronger undead started to appear. Ghouls, undead beasts, skeleton mages and ghasts were interspersed amongst the tightening lines of their forces. The beastmen's advance slowed to a near stop close to the line of vegetation at the valley bottom, but their fellows from behind pressed them forward. Maybe that was a bit too effective. Lady Zaradnik frowned down at the scene, reduce the rate of ranged attacks, including magic arrows, to a fifth of what it was and pull half of the ghouls and ghasts back. Keep pressing forward with the rest. They weren't allowed to use ghouls and ghasts in league battles because of the Sorceress Kingdom's regulations, but Olga had studied them as potential summons to use in real warfare. Ghouls were about as quick as a regular skeleton and twice as tough with better offense. By Adventurer Guild standards, a regular ghoul was difficulty rating 9. While they were physically unimpressive, their attacks had a chance of paralyzing their victims for up to half a minute. The average human adult had a 50% chance of being inflicted with this paralysis, and further attacks also had the same chance of inflicting paralysis. On top of that, their bites delivered a disease called ghoul fever, which made the infected grow sluggish and more susceptible to sickness. Like their paralyzing attack, the average human adult could resist it half of the time. Those who died from ghoul fever became ghouls themselves. Individuals about as strong as gold rank adventurers or higher became ghasts instead. Ghasts were a stronger type of ghoul, with the basic ghast being difficulty rating 27. Their paralyzing attacks and diseased bite were much more difficult to resist. They also had a small aura that extended roughly 3 meters from them. The stench of death and corruption emitted by the aura, which counted as a poison effect, had a chance of sickening all who stood within it. Naturally manifested ghouls preferred to lay in wait and ambush their targets, often hiding in shallow graves or pretending to be regular corpses. If the target was alone and the ghoul's opening attack paralyzed them, they were probably dead. The ghoul would feed on the paralyzed victim, with each bite having a chance of paralyzing their victim again until they succumbed to their wounds. Those who survived a ghoul attack might still be inflicted with ghoul fever, carrying it back with them to wherever they returned to and potentially starting a new ghoul infestation. When used in battle, however, the threat that ghouls and ghasts presented was magnified tenfold. The beastmen hit a wall of stench and faltered from its effects. Victims of paralyzing attacks fell to the ground and were torn apart by zombies and skeletons. Though they weren't individually overpowering against their beastman opponents, their debilitating influence on the living made the undead army far more dangerous than the sum of its soldiers. If they had ranged attackers, Raoul said, this wouldn't have happened. Why don't they? Olga added, even goblins use bows. It might be because they're so strong in the first place, Lady Zaradnik said. Their natural advantages give them everything that they need to thrive. Tools that we see as a necessity may simply be a luxury to them. Going by what we've found from their camps so far, only a few types of artisans are prevalent in their society. Some tradespeople that humans see as essential are next to non-existent. There's also the fact that the bulk of what we've been fighting so far appear to be civilians. A real beastman army may very well have everything that these beastmen appear to be missing. Olga pondered the Baroness' use of the term civilian. At least amongst humans, attacking non-combatants was considered a terrible thing. How would the beastman country feel about beastman civilians being killed? On one hand, they had invaded another country and were eating its people. On the other hand, they viewed those people no differently than livestock. If a pig went and started attacking humans, humans would kill the pig and assume that there was something wrong with the pig. Across the battlefield, the beastman advance began to reverse. Well, it wasn't so much reversing as the beastmen at the front were dying. The ones in the back were still pushing forward, but not as far. Don't they care that the people in the front are dying? That's easy to say from up here, Lady Zaradnik said, but I doubt they know what's going on right up until the point when they're the next ones in front. When commanders and soldiers talk about the flow of battle, they're not referring to some graceful sequence of events, they're talking about the combined inertia of thousands of bodies moving in one direction. A single soldier can only go with the flow. If they try to move independently, they'll be trampled. Our soldiers don't do that, Raoul said. They actually do, Lady Zaradnik told him. Back when they were taking turns entering the valley, one group of undead would push into another group of undead and knock some of the ones that were too close to the cliffs right off of them. When you have one Elder Lich controlling many undead, they are all coordinated according to the Elder Lich's will. Once you add more Elder Liches with their own groups, however, you end up with multiple wills that may or may not be thinking of the exact same thing. With a regular army composed of many individuals, that problem is orders of magnitude worse. But doesn't that mean it's impossible to change what an army was doing once they start doing it? Olga asked. It can, the Baroness answered. That's where an army's discipline and skill come in. It's not something that those outside of military professions realize, never mind appreciate. To most, an army is one thing, as if it's a single body that moves like a marker on a map. If a commander issues an order, it is executed as if it were a man turning a street corner, but that can't be further from the truth. Moving as a group, maintaining formations and performing maneuvers with thousands of soldiers is not something achieved on a whim. I think these tribes are in the process of realizing that. Olga wasn't sure that they were. The beastmen just kept going forward and fighting, and there was so much noise that it would be difficult, for humans, at least, to hear anything in the thick of battle. They made a hole. Raoul pointed at a break in the front. There's another one. Is this happening anywhere else, Psycho? Lady Zaradnik asked. The Elder Lich was silent for several moments before answering. It only appears to be happening in this gulch and the one to the west. We are attempting to rectify the problem and prevent future breaches. No, this is good, the Baroness replied. Let it happen. Let them push forward again. Olga and Raoul exchanged confused looks. Why is it good? Olga asked. Because it shows that they still have the will to fight. When they chose this battleground, I thought they would defend it from the heights. That made our task of reducing their numbers far more complicated. Instead, they've decided to funnel themselves into the valley. Lady Zaradnik slowly scanned the battlefield below. Olga wondered what she could see that they could not. When they get down to the bushes again, the Baroness said, we'll start using undead beasts and wights. Let's keep this back and forth going until they've completely abandoned their defensive positions. If we can manage that, they won't be able to escape what's coming. A great din rolled up from the valley, permeating the air with the roars and shouts of Kisha. Goro's ears lay flat at the sight, or perhaps the feel, of the ongoing battle. Elinhorsh, he said, you must pull the tribes back and restore order. The Overlord stood on a flat boulder roughly halfway down one of the contested approaches. He looked down at Goro. Why? Elinhorsh's tail swished lazily. We've seen a few reversals, but the tribes are holding their own. The undead army must be down to half of what it was before. They have yet to commit their strongest forces, Goro told Elinhorsh. We haven't even seen what controls this army yet. Above them, the bone vultures still made their lazy circles, and the blood meat hulks that their scouts had spotted as the undead advanced southeast were nowhere in sight. The hordes of weak undead had grown sparse, but stronger ones were starting to join the fight. A streak of light flashed from the edge of the bushes. There. Elinhorsh pointed excitedly. Is that one of the Elder Liches? That's a skeleton mage, Elinhorsh, Goro replied. A magic arrow spell from an Elder Lich would have more projectiles. Shortly after the spell hit some poor fellow in the front, a group of 4 figures tore their way straight through to the offending undead caster. They snuffed out its existence before returning to friendly lines. Oh. Well, it's gone now. The warriors of Narkira live up to their reputation. They are wary of significant threats to your people, Goro said, but there are limits to what they can do. This chaos makes it all the more difficult for them to perform their duties. Even as he said so, a discolored bruise appeared in their right flank. The bruise slowly grew and a growl filled Goro's throat. I'll return shortly, he told Elinhorsh. Don't get your head snatched off by a bone vulture. Without waiting for a response, Goro ran forward to remedy the problem developing in the line. He leapt over the heads of the milling crowd, pouncing on one of the newly raised wights clawing at the tribespeople nearby. His momentum carried him forward and he slashed a circular path through the dozens of undead beastmen wedging open a crack in the front. He released a long breath as the Irma surged forward to fill the gap, then flicked his ear as he observed the combatants swarming around him. In short, they were out of control. Beastmen such as the Irma could be confronted and intimidated, but, once any fighting started, their primal instincts would drive them to fight and eliminate challengers to their dominance. When it came to conflicts between living things, this behavior tended to serve them well. The undead, however, cared nothing whatsoever for the behavior of the living. The reasons for which the undead fought were as unnatural as the undead themselves. More often than not mindless and fueled by hatred of all that lived, they would stop at nothing to see the living destroyed and the land corrupted. If not held in check, they would spread their evil to the ends of the world. The threat of injury or destruction did not deter them, nor did the strength and resolve of their adversaries. Another set of wights appeared and he cleared them away before they could slay anyone and create more of themselves. Once again, the tribesmen surged forward to take advantage of his actions, though it was the opposite of what he wanted them to do. "Get back," he roared, "we need to get back to the ridge." His words fell on ears that heard but did not care. The front continued advancing. "Goro." He turned at the sound of a female's voice. Thurgakra appeared before him with 3 of her fellows. "These people are idiots," she complained. "What can we do to make them listen?" "A good, solid thrashing would set them straight," Goro replied, "but the master of this undead army is far too shrewd. They are playing the Irma like drunken minotaurs." "Did you spot any of the elder liches?" Thurgakra asked. "If we cannot stop the Irma, maybe we can end the fight for them." "If they're around, I didn't notice. They don't even need to show up. Elenhorsh for some reason believes that they are obliged to confront us directly as if this was a fighting pit in the cities. If this Katsa Plains is as vast as the humans claim, they could simply withdraw and come back with the same number of undead minions as before." "Then what?" Thurgak's tongue stilled. Goro's whiskers trembled with a low, steady vibration that pulsed through the cacophony of battle. "Work," Goro said. "These ones might not be so easy for the elder liches to replace, so maybe something will pop up in response. Or maybe we'll get fireballed. Take the one on the left." "We hear you, Goro." Thurgakra and her companions turned to confront their approaching foe. Brush was crushed and small trees toppled as a group of lumbering figures emerged from the darkness. For the first time, the Irma backed away of their own accord, cautiously eyeing the approaching blood-meat hulks. The steady thumping of their footfalls picked up. Goro sprinted forward, intent on stopping them before they trampled the Irma lines. Ability boost, Stone Claw Stride. Power surged through him. Goro's steps grew firm as he collided with the first of the blood-meat hulks. His claws sunk into the flesh of the undead construct as he twisted and hurled the 2-ton mass of rotting fat and muscle into the backs of the 2 others that had run by. They fell forward and tumbled to a stop before the Irma tribesmen, who immediately pounced upon their prone foes. The claws of the beastmen were highly effective against the naked flesh of the blood-meat hulks, though their undead opponents' regeneration and sheer durability made destroying them a daunting prospect for civilians. Goro released his Stone Claw Stride and approached the closest of his thrashing foes. Crimson Tiger Claw. 5 lines of fiery red trailed after his powerful slash as it raked over the length of the blood-meat hulk. It rolled over, bringing its meaty fist to bear in a tremendous backhand. He caught the ponderous attack and tore the abomination's arm off at the shoulder. With its regeneration disabled by his fire element-imbued attacks, a series of swift strikes finished it off. A minute later, he stood over the rapidly disintegrating forms of the blood-meat hulks with the Irma celebrating around him. Thurga came over from where she and her group had finished off their opponent. "You mumble so much about being old," she said, "but your claws haven't dulled a single bit." "Oh, they have," Goro replied. "It's just you youngsters that are so easily impressed these days." He swept his gaze over the front, searching for significant threats. Other blood-meat hulks had appeared, but the groups of Nakira interspersed throughout the line dealt with them promptly. Since they had destroyed a not insignificant number of strong undead minions, a part of him hoped that the masterminds behind the undead army would expose themselves to eliminate the Nakira warriors. Unfortunately, the undead army's controllers appeared as elusive as ever. The bone vultures above still hadn't been committed to the battle, so did it mean that there was far more yet at the undead army's disposal? Still, he muttered, this behavior is strange. It's not strange at all for Irmakisha, Thurga sneered at the front lines, which had advanced once again. They are lizards who think themselves dragons. I meant the undead, Goro told the young warrior. Even if there are elder liches controlling them, they are being far too patient. Though the undead wouldn't fall victim to uncontrollable bouts of emotion, all intelligent beings had their own sense of pride. With the undead, it was something like a sense of ownership or accomplishment. Mummies fastidiously tended to their tombs and temples. Vampires carefully selected their covens and cultivated their underground societies. Elder liches threw themselves into research and created armies to defend their labyrinthine libraries. Generally speaking, elder liches were fairly straightforward in their tactics. They wore down their opponents with waves of weak undead, then finished them off with more powerful minions and some well-placed spells. Goro couldn't imagine them expending blood meat hulks so frivolously, as they were fairly rare to come across. "Are you suggesting that something's controlling the Elder Liches?" Thurgood asked. "Either that or the objective of this undead army is not what we assume it to be," Goro answered. "I sent her already, but, Thurgood, take your party and deliver what we've learnt in Artorica. Warn the clans along the way, too." The young warrior took a step back, her whiskers drooping at his instructions. We can't just quit the field while we're still contracted to Kisha. Thurgood protested. "It would be a stain upon the honor of Narkira." "I know that it's difficult," Goro said, "and it will be even more difficult to carry out your task. But what is happening here threatens all of the clans. The wise will understand this. I will be advising Elinhorsh to withdraw, as well." Thurgood exchanged glances with the members of her party. "And what will you do if they refuse to withdraw?" she asked. "Then they won't withdraw," Goro answered. "At least not until they break. But I have a feeling that this fight will end very soon regardless of what they decide. You won't be missing much." The young female let out a sigh. "Fine. You had better make it out, too. I don't want to explain to her why I survived while you perished." "Even when things have become like this," Goro chuckled, "my grandson is still on your mind." Shut up." Thurgood dashed away. Her companion scrambled to keep up with her. The nearby tribesmen didn't even note their departure, so focused on the battle they were. Goro looked around and located Elinhorsh. The Overlord had advanced another 50 meters down the slope. Elinhorsh. "Goro. I saw your fight. The rumors of your strength have been proven far from idle boast. You are an inspiration to the brave warriors of Kisha." "Oh, so you're warriors now, are you?" "I do what I can," Goro replied. "On that note, I highly recommend that your clan withdraw from the battle." "This again?" Elinhorsh flicked his ear. "Even after demonstrating your dominance over these undead, you would call for a retreat?" "Well, yes," Goro said. "One would think that continuing to call for a retreat despite such a display would mean something. The behavior of this undead army suggests that the worst is still yet to come." "Yet to come? How can that be?" "Those undead that you fought must have been as powerful as veteran warriors. The world would be in a dire situation if it were so easy to produce such strength on demand." "That line of reasoning holds only if one thinks in the moment," Goro told him. "The lands beyond are unknown to us and we have no idea how long these undead have been around. For all we know, they could have been gathering their forces for centuries. They are too prepared for us to be treating them as a random undead horde, so we must withdraw and reevaluate the situation. This is the first thing the warrior clans would do upon encountering what we have. There is no shame in it." Elinhorsh's claws sheathed and unsheathed as he watched his tribespeople fighting the undead streaming out of the woods. "If we withdraw now," he said, "many will be lost for nothing. The other clans will see it as a defeat." "It's better than losing everyone for nothing," Goro told him. The clan lord took a deep breath, releasing it with a resigned expression. His roar carried over the clamor of combat. "We're done here for now. Gather your tribes and pull out of the valley." "Pull." Goro leapt up and swatted away a pale shadow falling on Elinhorsh's head. The bone vulture shattered and scattered into pieces over the ground. He grabbed the clan lord and hurled him down as 3 more bone vultures swooped down to rake the air where he once stood with their talons. Shouts rose all along the front as the undead in the skies overhead fell upon the beastman lines. Goro dispatched 6 more bone vultures that had all gone straight for Elinhorsh. A curse seethed out from between his teeth. They were waiting for this. The moment you called the withdrawal, those bone vultures attacked you and your lords. They're trying to keep us here. What? But why? Why? Goro snarled. It's obvious, they're trying to exterminate you all at once. Keep calling the retreat, I'll guard you as best as I can. He downed 3 more bone vultures while Elinhorsh's roars resounded over the valley. Little by little, Kisha started to pull back. Faster, damn it. We need to leave now. A familiar vibration thudded through the air. With it came a sight that encouraged the to back away more than any amount of their lords shouting. Like great boulders formed of flesh, a line of blood-meat hulks appeared from the shadows of the trees. Between the dozens upon dozens of undead constructs came hundreds of bone-white figures, their round shields and curved blades gleaming in the moonlight. Skeleton warriors. But there must be well over 1,000 of them. What in the world is going on here? Between the bone vultures and the newly appeared undead was might enough to match one of the warrior clans. If one added the elder liches that must be controlling the mindless undead army, 5 or 6 warrior clans would be needed to defeat them in a conventional battle. And then there was whatever might be coordinating the elder liches. A large formation of crimson-hued skeleton warriors appeared at the center of the advancing enemy ranks. Red skeleton warriors now? What's next? Wraiths? Vampires? Goro's ears swiveled towards a new commotion in the rear. He turned to see silhouettes of beastmen being cast into the air. So this is it, Elin Horsh. You must flee this place. The undead are trying to close this trap. The first of the undead to reach them from the ridge above was no unknown abomination, but one in the form of an Irma tribesman. Goro slashed its torso open, sending it tumbling to the side. He flexed his claws in thought. This sensation, not a zombie? It was too strong to be a wight. Another undead Irma lunged at him. Goro's claws came together to crush its head. His foot lashed out to kick it away when it kept coming for him. Definitely not a zombie. But what are they? Many undead perished when their heads were destroyed, but there were also many that persisted even after substantial portions of their bodies were destroyed. Some could even move their dismembered parts around. A rush of movement to the side caught Goro's attention. He barely acted in time to intercept one of the new undead heading for Elin Horsh. I told you to flee, Elin Horsh. Goro snarled. You did, the clan lord agreed. Goro's lip curled at the response. Were they already trapped? No, there are still many ways out. Wait. Elin Horsh wasn't the only one behaving strangely. Dozens of Irma in the vicinity simply stood in place while the undead approached. They roared in panic and disgust when their claws reached them, but they did not fall back even as they were torn apart. An oppressive feeling pressed down on him, heralding the approach of a powerful foe. Recognition of the figure in its black plate armor instantly dawned upon him. Great. Never mind vampires, we skipped right up to Death Knights. A Death Knight had appeared, using its area taunt ability to keep the nearby Irma from fleeing. The identity of the unknown undead attacking them was made apparent as well. They were squire zombies. The situation went from bad to incalculably worse. Death Knights were too powerful for elder liches to control. At the same time, Death Knights couldn't lead mindless undead aside from the zombies that they created. A Night Lich being the leader of the undead army became highly likely, or perhaps it was a coalition of intelligent undead. Either way, a great evil had stirred and now threatened the entire region. Was this truly incited by us, or did we simply happen to find ourselves in the way of their plans? They may have simply used the Beastman occupation as a cover for an invasion of their own. With the apparent cause clear for all to see, no one would question why the undead had come unless they directly saw what was going on and who was involved. The thought he had shared with Thurgoth echoed in his head. The master of this undead army is far too shrewd. Night Liches were known for their vast intellect, but that intellect was supposed to revolve around more studious pursuits. They were not known for any feats of strategic mastery, and neither were undead in general. Were they collaborating with the humans, after all? Or was it some unknown type of undead orchestrating their movements? Another squire zombie approached. Goro tore it apart. This time, the Death Knight took note of his actions and stomped in his direction. He splayed his claws and lowered his stance, a low growl rolling from his throat as he bared his fangs. The Death Knight did not falter in the slightest at his display. It brandished a massive flambeau that pulsed with an evil light, raising it high over its head as it charged. Ability boost, evasion. Goro sidestepped his opponent's shield, appearing on its right side. He reached out with his left and grabbed the Death Knight's wrist, aiming a vicious slash at its elbow. Twin Tiger Strike. His attack landed solidly. A screech filled the air as his claws raked down the Death Knight's vambrace. So hard. The point of the Death Knight's flambeau crossed behind its shield, forcing Goro to release his grip and leap away. After a glance at its arm, the Death Knight raised its shield and approached again. Goro dashed forward, closing inside the Death Knight's measure. Its broad shield loomed before him. This time, he did not evade. Penetrating strikes, rending claw. His attack slammed into the wall of black metal. The flat of the Death Knight's flambish slid over the top of its shield, sending its wicked point at Goro's forehead. Reinforce hide. The sword stopped and Goro leapt back again, examining his handiwork. Unfortunately, the result was not as telling as he had hoped. With the sundering attack that could rip steel to shreds with a single blow, only 4 small holes from his right claw marred the shield's surface. How many attacks would it take to break down the Death Knight's defense? To his surprise, the Death Knight stepped back, glaring at him with its baleful crimson gaze. Goro narrowed his eyes. Had it grown cautious over the condition of its equipment? He took the initiative, lunging forward to direct a barrage of attacks against his opponent's shield. It appeared to be at a loss. Blocks and parries only served to fulfill Goro's objective of destroying its equipment. The Death Knight danced backwards on awkward steps as Goro pressed his advantage. Something struck him in the back. He disengaged and twisted around to see what it was. A coruscating ray hit him full in the chest and he staggered. Before him floated 5 Elder Liches. Oh, now they come out. Maximize magic, ray of enfeeblement. Maximize magic, ray of enfeeblement. Maximize magic, ray of enfeeblement. 3 more coruscating rays lanced out from 3 bony hands. He evaded 2, but the third caught him in the leg. Hold species. Goro hardened himself against magic, shaking off the effects of the paralyzing spell. He took a step forward, but then something grabbed him by the shoulders from behind. He looked down to see the black gauntlets of the Death Knight. Damn it. Let me go. Maximize magic, ray of enfeeblement. Maximize magic, ray of enfeeblement. Unable to dodge, Goro steadily weakened under the Elder Lich's repeated magical assaults. Eventually, his strength left him entirely and he slouched powerlessly in the Death Knight's cold grip. Thurgood ran. Shame filled her as she did so, but she ran nonetheless. She and her companions dashed over the fallen left in the wake of Urmakisha's advance, their claws throwing up clods of blood and mud as they dashed up towards the valley ridge. The sounds of battle followed them from far below, echoing off of the walls of the rounded gulch. How will we tell them? I don't know. She didn't mean to snap at the question. It was one they would eventually have to find an answer to. A set of warriors caught fleeing from battle would not be received very well. They would be branded as cowards and scorned. No one would pay their words any mind. It wouldn't surprise her if they were attacked. This was the reason why Goro told them to inform Natorika. The other clans occupying the human lands were not of the warrior castes and had become drunk with pride over their conquest. They thought themselves greater than they were and would not hesitate to visit judgment upon what they would see as a group of unworthy warriors. At the same time, there was fear. All knew that there wasn't enough food to sustain them. They feared the coming famine and they feared losing territory, making things worse for their people. They feared a future filled with uncertainty and, if they felt cornered by the news Thurgood and her comrades bore, they were even more likely to lash out at them. A gust of wind whipped over them as they made the top of the ridge, driving away the odors from the chaotic melee below. Thurgood stopped to catch her breath, gulping down lungfuls of cold night air. A few of her fellows took long draughts from their flasks and she flopped down onto the grass to cool herself off. We can't stop for long, one of her warriors said. We HSST. Thurgood raised a paw. The presence of the undead already filled her with an unsettling sensation, but that sensation started to rise in intensity. She looked back down into the valley, but, even with the moon overhead, little could be seen beyond the range of her dark vision. It didn't sound like Urmakisha was facing some terrifying new foe. Something's coming, she said. Something worse than what we fought below. We need to hide. As they made for the tall grass, the sensation grew oppressive. Her fur rose on end and her eyes frantically scanned the surroundings. We should keep going, someone said. We shouldn't stick around for what? A figure entered the range of their dark vision, followed by another. They were about as tall as a moderately sized beastman, which also made them too tall to be humans. Yet they moved like humans and didn't have tails sticking out of their black armor. Considering the undead army below, there was no doubt that they were some unnatural evil given form. The oppressive feeling intensified as more came into view. In the end, 14 in total entered the valley and vanished into the darkness. Goro was right, she breathed. Can they win? Someone asked. Goro is still down there, yeah? I I don't know, Thurgok replied. Goro is a warrior of great renown, but there are so many of those new undead. Plus the elder liches haven't appeared yet. She didn't want to say it. The chances of survival were likely slim. This in itself was unthinkable. How could the humans stand against such a threat on their borders if they couldn't even defend themselves against the clans of the commoner castes? Hey, what's that? Thurgok looked up, following the pointed claw of one of her warriors. A Narkiera hunter had appeared, running in the undead column's wake. Maybe they were running from her? Someone mused. Run? Another scoffed. The undead do not feel fear. She's trying to warn our people, Thurgok moaned in realization. We set lookouts, but they're useless if what comes is faster than they are. The undead were tireless and even hunters could not sprint indefinitely. Whoever was controlling the enemy army was mercilessly exploiting every weakness of the Beastman tribes. Every weakness. Her eyes widened. Every weakness had not been exploited yet. There were those that the undead could pursue at their leisure. We're splitting up, Thurgok told her warriors. Get to the camps. We need to get the children out of here. No questions were asked. The stakes were clear. They went their separate ways and Thurgok ran to the nearest Terma camp. At the center, she found a circle of tribal elders. An old female with a broken fang peered at her with dulled eyes. Narkiera, she said. What are you doing here? You need to evacuate, Thurgok told the circle of elders. Everyone must flee to safety. Safety? The crone replied, Elinhorsh has assured us that we would be victorious. There is no need to evacuate. You idiots. Save your children, at least. Rue. Searing pain blossomed over her shoulders as something dashed her to the ground. She snarled and twisted, lashing out against her assailant. The bone vulture was knocked into a tent. Shouts of alarm sounded in the camp. Damn it, too late again. Why are we always late? It's as if they're waiting for our every move. Another bone vulture swooped down in the moonlight. She leapt up and batted it out of the air, pouncing onto its back. Crushing fang. A loud crunch filled her senses as she crushed the bone vulture's neck in her jaws. Its body continued to thrash around until she pounded it into the ground a half-dozen times. She reached out and grabbed the legs of her first attacker, which was still tangled in the tent. Ability boost. With a claw gripping each leg, she ripped the bone vulture in half. Breath-heaving, she scanned the skies for threats until she realized that the elders were still staring at her. Why are you just standing there? She screamed at them, run.